Myers, and then Rob Henry.
Prime Minister, the Fonterra in the dairy industry seems to be on a hiding to nothing as far as the media is concerned, whether it's Sandloo, price of milk with the urban population. You're dealing with the media every day. What advice can you give us?
Well, don't follow my strategy from some weeks, that would be my advice.
Yes, it seems quite ironic because Fonterra had a bond issue and it was for 300 million. It was oversubscribed at 1.2 billion. So there's confidence in the industry. And you just comment, recently you spent some time with Henry van der Hayden in China. What is the image of Fonterra in China at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think first thing with the media is take it all with a bit of grain of salt. I mean, I couldn't believe yesterday I was theoretically on the front page of the paper for flying on first class tickets, which were Helen Clark's tickets. You know, they were the ones I had to take because I'd literally signed up and been sworn in 2 days later and haven't flown since. And, you know, so the spin that sometimes comes out of the media is remarkable. But anyway, look, on the wider issue of Fonterra, we deliberately took Henry on that trip to China, where we met both Hu Jintao and Jiabao, so the Premier and Prime Minister President and Premier of China. They were extremely well received. You know, so in fact, what I would say is China sees New Zealand very much as part of the future for their agricultural sector, and we're very much of the view that the Sandloo incident was behind us, an acknowledgement actually that they were one of many companies, and not something that Fonterra could easily control. I mean, that was the problem, and as you're well aware, to control vertical integration of their milk supply. I think the second thing that was really interesting about that trip when we were up there was one of the things that Wen Jiabao asked us was to get more involved in trying to lift food standards in China, and particularly in relation to milk, but generally food. And I'll tell you what shocked me about that was this is what he actually said to us. He said, we've got Chinese farmers who are literally pouring their milk down the sink because they can't sell it as a result of the melamine scandal. And I had thought, I've got to say, to be perfectly honest, I had thought that the way that that scandal would play out was that Sandloo's reputation would be tarnished. There was a risk that New Zealand's reputation was somehow attached there, even though it was nothing to do with New Zealand other than the ownership structure of it. And that would be tarnished, but that the international media might understand that, and that on the ground in China wouldn't have a clue what's going on. It's a vast country and quite poor in certain parts of it. It was actually the opposite. You know, what actually happened was the Chinese public understood, apparently acutely, which is why they weren't buying Chinese milk, and actually understood that New Zealand milk was of such a high quality they wanted to buy it. And you all know that the exports have been rapidly increasing now. Our two-way trade with China has been growing rapidly since we signed the FTA. A huge component of that has been increased milk powder supplies to China. So I think my own view is that New Zealand has very few things, if anything, outside Fonterra that can be truly a world sort of champion. I hope we find an inventive Google in New Zealand or those other things. I hope that happens. But in the end, if you look at something that we have massive size, scale and leverage capability, it's Fonterra. And on that basis, I think we've really got to keep working with Fonterra closely to do what we can. And the industry has to support it because it's truly a global champion.
In room of the economy. But the merger, or the proposed merger, which is now off between Lincoln and Ag Research, has thrown up some questions about it got us all thinking about the science system. Science is a balance between building capability, blue sky research, and applied research. There's also a balance there to be struck between the biological sciences and the physical sciences. So my question to you is, do we have the balance right, and what is the future of our science system?
I think no, we don't have the balance right. And I think you're right that ultimately the proposed form, the merger between Ag Research and Lincoln, won't go ahead, as you're probably aware. What it has exposed, though, is that there are issues that now need to be dealt with, I think, in terms of the long-term future. I think science has got to play a more important role in New Zealand. It's one of the reasons why I've appointed Peter Gluckman to be my Chief Science Advisor. It's an unusual move. Britain has a chief scientific advisor. We haven't had one, to the best of my knowledge, before. It's a recognition that science can play a really important role in the future development of New Zealand and growing that innovation. And actually, in my view, government has to do more than just taking a bit of a subjective view or a political response to everything. It actually has to understand the science and use the science to help drive the right outcomes and a good debate. So I don't think the balance is right in New Zealand at the moment. I think that's going to be one of the challenges, is what do we really expect from our CRIs? We seriously expect them to earn 9% return. If so, why and how? Is that connection between the universities, where you have a lot of research happening and bright young graduates, is that linkage between them and the CRIs the right one? Is it working? So I strongly suggest it might not be. And then I think it goes into, where is industry going with this? Because you made the point, William, about blue skies research. So are we as a country producing a whole lot of research which is interesting to scientists and writes up and leads to the written reports, but goes nowhere in terms of New Zealand? And there is an argument that the demand side of the business, in other words, you guys, what you want to see down on the farm and what other industries in New Zealand want to see, maybe should have a louder voice in actually what's being driven coming out of our science and research capability. It's not to say that we shouldn't have blue skies research. Of course we should. We've proven beyond, well and truly in the past that we're capable of coming up with some brilliant ideas. But I remember once going to Taiwan, and it was a very interesting trip. They have a thing up there called ITRI, which is their big scientific centre, which is a bit like Biopolis in Singapore. And I tell you what they do in ITRI, they went away and they said half of all of our research is going to take place in areas where we have a huge history. So in their case it's resins and paints and semiconductors, and half of their research is happening in areas that are new, nanotechnology. So they came up with, for instance, a mobile phone that you only need to charge once. They have to recharge it. So it would be a godsend for my 16-year-old daughter, but not so good for me necessarily. So they're in there thinking about how do they transform their industry and use science to really keep building their productivity. And I think that's where New Zealand's got to start thinking, is how much is coming out of our research institutes are actually going into things that are transforming our economy. Because if you look over the last 10 years, and if Bill was here, he would have spent a long time talking to you about it, the truth of the last decade in New Zealand is productivity didn't grow. It was a 1% growth. It was a very low level of growth on average. If we want to close the gap with Australia, if we want you to be wealthier and your children to be wealthier, the simple bottom line is we have to grow productivity in New Zealand. And one part of that is science. And again, you and I know that if you look at the value-added component that's coming out of Fonterra, as one example, it's growing. Yes, the nutraceutical part of the business is growing, but are we anywhere near even scratching the surface? I'd strongly suggest we're miles away.
Last question, I'm sorry, is going to be from